My family demanded to speak with the hotel manager because my presence was making people uncomfortable. They froze when they saw my portrait on the main wall. The shame they felt in that moment doesn't compare to the humiliation they put me through for 3 days. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. My name is Eleanor Vance, I am 72 years old, and until recently, I believed that family love was unconditional. How naive I was. It all started 2 months ago when Claire, my eldest daughter, called me with that sweet voice she only used when she needed something. "Mom, we want to invite you to celebrate our wedding anniversary at a beautiful hotel in Charleston. It will be like a little family honeymoon." Her words sounded so warm over the phone, so full of feigned affection. I should have been suspicious when they told me the invitation was for the following week. "We just got a last-minute deal," explained Mark, my son-in-law, with that salesman smile he perfected at his job. I also should have noticed the awkward pause when I asked for the details of the trip. "Oh, right, Mom, about that," Claire murmured, her voice suddenly losing that artificial warmth. "As you know, times are tough for everyone. The hotel is a bit pricey, so, well, everyone will have to cover their own share. It's $500 per person, including 3 nights and all meals." $500. Practically my entire monthly Social Security check. But the dream of spending quality time with my family, of feeling included after months of short phone calls and increasingly infrequent visits, overpowered my common sense. "Of course, sweetie. It will be a pleasure to join you." That night, I took my savings from the envelope I kept under the mattress. $20 and $50 bills that I had set aside penny by penny, denying myself small pleasures, buying the store brand at the supermarket, walking instead of taking the bus when the weather allowed. All for moments like this, I thought. For my family. On Friday morning, as I packed my oldest but sturdiest suitcase, I felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. I chose my best dresses, the ones I had worn to weddings and important celebrations, though I admit they didn't fit as well as they used to. The years and the arthritis had changed my body, but my dignity was still intact. Or so I thought. The Beaumont Grand Hotel stood majestically in the historic heart of Charleston, its brick walls glowing under the midday sun. It was exactly the kind of place I had always admired from a distance, with wrought iron balconies and windows that seemed to hold centuries of stories. For a moment, my heart filled with gratitude toward my children for including me in something so special. But the illusion shattered as soon as I crossed the threshold of the lobby. Claire greeted me with a cold, mechanical hug, while her eyes scanned my navy blue dress with barely disguised disapproval. "Mom, so glad you made it," she said, but her tone had that metallic quality I knew so well, that hollow politeness she used when she wanted to keep up appearances. Mark approached carrying Sophie, my 5-year-old granddaughter, who greeted me with a genuine smile that contrasted painfully with the coldness of the adults. "Grandma Eleanor, did you bring me candy?" Her innocent question was quickly silenced by Claire. "Sophie, don't bother Grandma. Come here." The word bother lodged in my chest like a splinter. When had my grandchildren's questions become a bother? David, my younger son, arrived shortly after with his wife Jessica and my 16-year-old grandson, Ethan. Their greeting was even more distant, a nod of the head that could barely be considered acknowledgement. Jessica gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, while Ethan didn't even look up from his phone. "Well, Mom, let's get you checked in," Claire announced with that cold efficiency she had developed in her job as an administrator. "We already took care of our rooms this morning." As I waited my turn at the front desk, I watched them interact with a naturalness that completely excluded me. They laughed, commented on the beautiful lobby, and made plans for the day's activities. It was as if an invisible bubble surrounded me, a barrier separating me from the family joy I had come to find. When it was finally my turn, the receptionist handed me a room key with a professional smile. "Room 127, Mrs. Vance. It's on the ground floor, at the end of the hall." Claire quickly stepped forward. "Ground floor? I thought we had reserved all our rooms together on the second floor." The receptionist consulted her computer with a confused expression. "According to our records, the reservation for Mrs. Vance was modified early this morning. A room further away was specifically requested, something more quiet." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire avoided my gaze, pretending to check something on her phone. Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. It was then that I began to understand that my place in this family celebration had been carefully orchestrated to minimize my presence. "It's fine," I murmured, taking the key with hands that had begun to tremble slightly. "Quiet is fine." But I wasn't fine. As I dragged my suitcase down the long hallway to my isolated room, I felt something for the first time in my life that I never thought I would experience: shame for being who I was. Shame for being the mother who had sacrificed so much, the grandmother who had given all her love, the woman who had believed family was a sacred refuge where there would always be a place for her. Room 127 had no real windows. Just a small, high casement window that looked out onto a brick alley, letting in a dim, melancholy light. I sat on the single bed, surrounded by walls that seemed to close in on me, and for the first time in many years, I wondered if I truly knew the people for whom I had lived my entire life. That first night, I could barely sleep. The mattress was hard, and the room had a strange echo that amplified every sound from the hallway. I could hear the distant laughter of my family from their rooms on the second floor, their voices mixing with the soft music coming from the hotel bar. It was like listening to a party in my own home to which I hadn't been invited. At 8 in the morning, I went down to the dining room, expecting to find my family having breakfast together as we had planned. I saw them sitting at a round table by the windows overlooking the courtyard, where the morning light created that golden atmosphere I loved so much. For a moment, my heart filled with hope. "Good morning," I said, approaching with a smile that tried to hide the sadness of the previous night. Claire looked up from her latte with that expression I knew so well, that mix of annoyance and resignation she adopted when things didn't go exactly as she had planned. "Oh, Mom. Good morning." Her voice sounded as if she had completely forgotten that I would be part of these family breakfasts. "We already ordered. The waiter will be with you in a moment." There was no empty chair at their table. All 8 chairs were occupied, including one where Jessica had placed her designer handbag, a Tory Burch that probably cost more than my social security check for 3 months. I stood beside them, waiting for someone to make room, to move the bag, to invite me to sit. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Mark continued reading the news on his iPad. David meticulously cut his omelet without looking up. Ethan had his headphones on, completely disconnected from the world. Only little Sophie smiled at me, but when she opened her mouth to speak, Claire interrupted her. "Sophie, finish your orange juice. We have to be ready for the tour at 10. "Tour?" I asked, feeling my stomach tighten. "Oh, yeah," David mumbled without looking at me. "We booked a private walking tour of the historic district. You know, lots of walking in cobblestone streets. We thought maybe you'd prefer to rest." Rest. The word sounded so final, so definitive. As if at 72, I were an invalid incapable of walking on cobblestones. I, who had hiked all over the Blue Ridge Mountains in my youth, who until last year still walked from my downtown home to the farmer's market every weekend. "I'd love to join you," I insisted, trying to maintain a cheerful tone. "I've been on that tour many times, I could tell you stories that—" "Mom," Claire interrupted me with that forced patience she used when she felt someone didn't understand something obvious. "The group is already full. It's for exactly 8 people. Besides, the guide talks very fast, and the tour is 4 hours on your feet." 4 hours on your feet. As if during all my years working at the public library, I hadn't spent entire days on my feet, organizing books, helping patrons, climbing up and down ladders to reach volumes on high shelves. As if my experience and stamina were worthless. "I understand," I lied, feeling a lump form in my throat. The waiter approached with a professional smile. "What would you like for breakfast, ma'am?" Before I could answer, Claire intervened. "She can sit at that corner table. She'll be more comfortable there, quieter." The corner table. A tiny table against the wall, where they had seated an elderly German couple who were eating in silence. The message was clear: that was my place, with the other old people, away from the energy and joy of the family. I sat alone, ordering a black coffee and a piece of toast that I knew I wouldn't be able to swallow. From my corner, I watched them prepare for their excursion, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear, making plans that didn't include me. It was like watching my own life from the outside, as if I had died but my spirit was still there, invisible and irrelevant. As they left, I remembered all the times I had been there for them. When Claire divorced her first husband, I took care of Sophie for months while she found herself in yoga classes and therapy sessions that I paid for with my savings. When David lost his job during the recession, I took out a second mortgage on my house to lend him the money for his new consulting firm, money he never paid back because families don't keep tabs. I remembered the sleepless nights caring for Ethan when he was a baby and had asthma, rocking him while Jessica and David went out to parties. The birthdays where I bought the most expensive gifts because kids deserve nice things, even if it meant I ate beans all week. The Christmases where I cooked for 15 people, cleaned the entire house afterward, and no one stayed to help because "you're used to it, Mom, you do everything so well." I thought of my sister, Carol, who lives in Florida and always told me, "Eleanor, don't be a fool. Those kids of yours only call when they need something." I always defended them, insisting that family love wasn't measured in terms of give and take. How blind I had been. I went up to my windowless room and sat on the bed, staring at the 4 walls that seemed to mock my solitude. I took out the smartphone Ethan had given me last year, so you can stay connected, Grandma, and checked the family's group chat. There were photos from the tour. Claire posing elegantly in front of Rainbow Row. Mark and David toasting with beers on a rooftop bar. Sophie running through a historic garden. Jessica taking selfies with panoramic views of the harbor. Ethan, even he, was smiling in a group photo. They all looked so happy. So complete. So perfect without me. There wasn't a single message asking how I had spent my morning, if I had eaten well, if I was feeling okay. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment they walked out of the hotel. That afternoon, when they returned, sun-kissed and full of stories, I tried to join their conversation in the lobby. How was the tour? I remember when I took Claire for the first time, she was 8 and was fascinated by the old houses. Mom, Claire cut me off sharply, we're tired. It's been a very long day. Jessica yawned dramatically. I need a nap before dinner. They dispersed to their rooms without even a glance in my direction, leaving me alone again in the lobby, surrounded by strangers who seemed more interested in talking to me than my own family. That night, during dinner at the hotel restaurant, I was seated at the far end of the table. No one passed me the dishes, no one included me in the conversations. When I tried to tell a story about my work at the library, Mark interrupted me to talk about his latest car sales. When I wanted to give my opinion on current politics, David changed the subject to football. It was as if my voice were an annoying noise that had to be silenced. At the end of the meal, as we waited for dessert, Claire approached the waiter. Excuse me, could I speak with the manager? There's a situation we'd like to discuss. My blood ran cold. I knew, with that intuition that only mothers develop after decades of knowing their children, that the situation was me. The manager appeared 5 minutes later. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and a navy suit that gave him an air of quiet authority. He approached our table with the professional smile that characterizes people in luxury hospitality. Good evening. I'm Alexander Reed, the hotel manager. I was told you wanted to speak with me. Claire stood up immediately, adjusting the black dress she had bought especially for this occasion. Her posture was that of someone accustomed to having her complaints taken seriously, a woman who knew how to use her college education and social status as weapons when the situation required it. Mr. Reed, thank you for your time, she began with that soft but firm voice she had perfected in her years as an administrator at the private clinic where she worked. You see, we're here celebrating our wedding anniversary with the whole family, and we've run into a situation that's a bit delicate. The manager nodded, maintaining a neutral expression he had surely developed after years of dealing with all sorts of guest complaints. Of course, please tell me how I can help. I remained seated, feeling the dessert turn to sand in my mouth. I knew what was coming, but a part of me refused to believe it. A part of me still hoped Claire would say something about the faulty air conditioning in my room, or the noise from the pipes, or anything other than. It's about my mother, Claire said, and the word mother left her lips as if it had a bitter taste. Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The manager looked at me for the first time since he had arrived, and I looked down, feeling the heat of shame rise up my neck to my cheeks. My mother is, well, she's at an age where she sometimes doesn't realize how her behavior might affect other people, Claire continued, talking about me as if I weren't there, as if I were a small child unable to understand the adult conversation. Behavior, the manager asked, clearly confused. Mark joined the conversation, backing up his wife with the kind of marital solidarity that had been denied to me all these years. You see, Eleanor is an elderly woman, and sometimes, well, she repeats stories, talks a bit too loudly, moves with difficulty. We understand it's normal for her age, but we're in such an elegant hotel and other guests have commented, Jessica added, lying with a naturalness that froze me to the core. A couple at the next table told us this morning that they felt uncomfortable during breakfast. It was a lie. A cruel, calculated lie. During breakfast, I had eaten alone at my corner table, practically in silence, exchanging only a few polite words with the waiters. But they were building their narrative with the precision of lawyers presenting a case. Look, David intervened, adopting the reasonable tone he used in his business presentations, we don't want to cause any trouble. We just want everyone, including my mother, to have a pleasant vacation. But perhaps, isn't there some way she could enjoy the facilities without interfering with the other guests' experience? Interfering. The word hit me like a slap. My existence had become an interference. The manager seemed increasingly uncomfortable. His eyes darted between my children and me, trying to understand exactly what kind of situation he was handling. What kind of solution did you have in mind? Well, Claire said, lowering her voice as if discussing something confidential, we were thinking that perhaps my mother could take her meals in her room. It's more comfortable for her, she doesn't have to worry about dressing for the dining room, and we could enjoy our celebrations without tension, Mark finished. Tension. I was a tension that needed to be resolved. Sophie, my little granddaughter, seemed confused by the whole conversation. She came over to me and whispered, Grandma, why can't you eat with us? Sophie, Go back to your seat, Claire ordered sharply. The adults are talking. The manager cleared his throat. Mrs. Vance, he said, addressing me directly for the first time, how do you feel about this situation? All eyes turned to me. It was my chance to defend myself, to explain my side, to shout the truth about what was really happening. But when I opened my mouth, only a broken whisper came out. I just wanted to spend time with my family. Of course, Mom, Claire said with that false sweetness she had perfected over the years. And you will spend time with us. Just in a way that's more appropriate for your age. Appropriate for my age. As if I were a child being punished, forced to eat alone until I learned how to behave. The manager looked genuinely troubled by the situation. Look, this is a very delicate matter. It's not common for families to request this type of arrangement. We understand it's unusual, David insisted, but we're talking about a 72-year-old woman with some age-related challenges. This is for her own good as much as everyone else's. Age-related challenges. As if I were an Alzheimer's patient instead of a completely lucid woman who had simply made the mistake of growing old. The silence that followed was awful. I could feel the stares of the other diners, some clearly intrigued by the drama unfolding at our table. A middle-aged couple at the next table whispered to each other, no doubt speculating about the situation with the troublesome old woman. Finally, the manager spoke. Very well, I can arrange for room service for Mrs. Vance if that is truly your preference. But I would like to verify a few details first. Of course, Claire said, clearly relieved that her plan was working. Could you all accompany me for a moment? There is something I'd like to show you in the main lounge. My children exchanged looks of satisfaction. David winked at Mark as if they had just closed a successful deal. Jessica smiled with that look of superiority she wore when things went exactly as she had planned. As they rose from the table to follow the manager, I remained seated, feeling my world crumble piece by piece. They had gotten what they wanted, to officially remove me from their family vacation, to confine me to my room like a shame that had to be hidden. Sophie stayed with me, taking my hand with that innocence only children possess. Grandma, are you sad? A little, my love, I whispered, stroking her blonde hair that shone under the dining room lights. I'm going to ask Mommy if I can have dinner with you in your room, she said with a fierce determination that reminded me of myself at her age. It will be like a picnic. Her sweetness broke my heart. At least someone in this family still loved me, still saw me as a human being worthy of love and companionship. I didn't know that in 5 minutes, when the manager showed them what he had to show them in the main lounge, everything was going to change forever. From my table, I could see the manager guiding my family toward the hotel's main lounge, that majestic space I had admired briefly upon my arrival. Sophie had stayed with me, swinging her legs from her chair as she finished her vanilla ice cream, oblivious to the drama unfolding just a few yards away. Grandma, why do Mommy and Daddy always talk like you're invisible? She asked me with the brutal honesty only children possess. Her question pierced my soul. How could I explain to a 5-year-old something I couldn't fully understand myself? How could I tell her that I had raised 2 children who had apparently lost all ability to see their mother as a human being? Sometimes grown-ups forget the important things, my love, I replied, wiping a drop of ice cream from her chin with my napkin. From where we were sitting, I could partially see into the main lounge through the open glass doors. The manager had turned on all the lights, and the wrought iron chandeliers cast dramatic shadows on the stone walls. It was a space that breathed history, with its high, vaulted ceilings and arched windows that had witnessed centuries of visitors. Claire walked through the lounge with that stiff posture she adopted when she was nervous but trying to maintain control. Mark had his hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels as he always did when he felt uncomfortable. David was looking at his watch, clearly impatient to resolve this situation and get back to his vacation. Jessica was examining the paintings on the walls with that fake artistic appreciation she used to impress people. The manager stopped in front of the main wall, just below the largest portrait in the room. From my distance, I couldn't see it clearly, but I noticed how my children's postures began to change. Claire went rigid, as if she'd seen a ghost. Mark took a step back, stumbling slightly into Jessica. David brought a hand to his forehead in a gesture I recognized immediately. It was exactly what he did as a boy when he realized he'd done something terribly wrong. What are they looking at, Grandma? Sophie asked, trying to follow my gaze. I don't know, sweetie, I murmured, though a strange feeling was beginning to grow in my stomach. A mixture of apprehension and something I hadn't felt in years, expectation. The manager was speaking, gesturing toward the portrait, and though I couldn't hear his words from there, I saw the color drain from my children's faces. Claire had gone white as a sheet. David was running his hand through his hair over and over, a nervous tic he'd developed as a teenager. Jessica looked back and forth between the portrait and Claire, as if waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Then the manager turned and walked toward us. Mrs. Vance, he called from the entrance of the dining room, his voice resonating with a courtesy that seemed much more genuine than before. "Could you please join us in the main lounge for a moment?" I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after sitting for so long. Sophie immediately clung to my hand. "I'm going with you, Grandma." We walked together toward the lounge, and with every step, the strange feeling in my stomach intensified. There was something familiar about that space, something that struck deep chords of memory I hadn't visited in years. When we finally reached the main lounge and I could clearly see the wall the manager had directed my family to, my heart stopped. There, in a majestic golden frame, was my portrait. Not just any portrait. It was the official photograph taken of me 15 years ago, when I received the National Preservation Honor Award for my work in saving the historical heritage of South Carolina. In the picture, I was wearing my best navy blue suit, the same one I had worn to all the important ceremonies of my career. My eyes shone with a confidence and dignity I had forgotten I once possessed. But what truly took my breath away was the golden plaque beneath the portrait, in honor of Mrs. Eleanor Vance, visionary and benefactor. Through her vision, dedication, and generosity, this historic 18th-century building was rescued from ruin and transformed into the Beaumont Grand Hotel, preserving for future generations one of Charleston's most important architectural treasures. Founder of the Carolina Heritage Restoration Project. Tireless protector of our cultural legacy. My legs trembled. Sophie looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandma, that's you. You're on the wall like a queen." Claire was completely still, staring at the portrait as if it were an apparition. Her mouth was slightly open, but no sound came out. Mark had backed away several steps, as if the portrait were contagious. David had his hands over his face, clearly mortified. Jessica looked back and forth between Claire and me, trying to process the information. The manager cleared his throat softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to formally introduce you to Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the founder and primary benefactor of this hotel." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. 30 years ago, the manager continued, addressing my children directly, this building was a ruin slated for demolition. Mrs. Vance not only prevented its destruction, but she also invested her entire family inheritance into its restoration. She coordinated with architects, historians, traditional artisans. She secured grants from the state government and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She dedicated 5 years of her life, sometimes working 18-hour days, to return this place to its original glory. Claire finally found her voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. "Mom, is this true?" I nodded slowly, feeling 30 years of silence begin to crack. "Yes, Claire. It's true. But, why did you never tell us?" David asked, his voice filled with genuine confusion. "I did tell you," I answered softly. "Many times. You called it Mom's obsession with old rocks. You said I was wasting my money on silly hobbies. That I should be thinking about more practical things." The memories came flooding back. The family dinners where I tried to explain the project's historical importance, only to see their eyes glaze over with boredom. The times I asked for their support, their understanding, only to hear comments about how I was throwing money down the drain and how it would be better to put those funds in savings accounts for the grandkids' inheritance. Mrs. Vance, the manager continued, didn't just save this building. Her work laid the foundation for the revitalization of this entire historic district. Thanks to her vision, Charleston preserves one of its most important architectural gems. Jessica was the first to try to recover. "Eleanor, we didn't know that. That my work had value?" I interrupted her with a serenity that surprised me. That my passion for history wasn't just the whim of a boring old woman? Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Eleanor, if we had known." "What?" I asked, and for the first time in decades, my voice held real authority. "What would you have done differently? Would you have treated me with respect? Would you have valued my opinions? Would you have stopped seeing me as a burden?" The manager looked at my children with an expression that had lost all its professional courtesy. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid there has been a very serious misunderstanding. You asked me to place restrictions on a guest, but that guest is the reason this hotel exists." The silence stretched for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. I could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall, the distant murmur of conversations from the dining room, the soft sound of other guests' footsteps in the hall. But in our small circle, surrounded by centuries of history that I had helped preserve, the air was so dense it felt solid. Claire was the first to try to speak, though her voice came out broken and barely audible. "Mom, you didn't know," I finished for her, not with bitterness, but with a deep, ancient sadness. "I know, Claire. You never cared to know." David took a few steps closer, his hands trembling slightly. It was strange to see him like this, so vulnerable. For all these years, he had been the strong son, the successful businessman, the one who always had the right answers and practical solutions. Now he looked like a little boy who had just broken something priceless and didn't know how to fix it. But Mom, why didn't you insist? Why didn't you make us understand? His question hurt me more than all his previous indifference. Make you? David, a child shouldn't need to be made to respect their mother. They shouldn't need proof of her value to treat her with dignity. Jessica covered her face with her hands. When she pulled them away, her eyes were bright with tears she hadn't yet allowed herself to shed. Eleanor, all those times you talked about your projects, we thought it was. It was what, Jessica? That it was, that you were trying to feel important. Like when old people make up stories to get attention. The brutal honesty of her confession took my breath away. It was worse than I had imagined. They hadn't just ignored my work, they had assumed it was a product of senility, of a mind fabricating imaginary grandeur to compensate for an empty life. Mark, who had been quiet until now, walked up to the portrait and read the plaque aloud, as if he needed to hear the words to believe them. Founder of the Carolina Heritage Restoration Project. His voice broke. Eleanor, is all this real? It's real, Mark, I answered calmly. As real as the 30 years I invited you to join me at award ceremonies, at openings, at conferences. As real as all the times you said you were too busy, that those things weren't important, that it was better if I went alone because I knew how to handle myself in those environments. The manager had remained discreetly in the background, but now he approached with a folder in his hands. Mrs. Vance, if I may, I'd like to show your family something else. He opened the folder and spread several photographs on the marble table in the center of the lounge. They were pictures of the building before the restoration, cracked walls, caved-in ceilings, broken windows with vines growing through them. And then, photos of the restoration process, me supervising masons, consulting with architects, examining every detail with a conservator's magnifying glass. In one photograph, I was kneeling on the floor, my hands covered in dust, examining the original 18th century tiles we had found buried under layers of concrete. In another, I was on a stepladder, directing the installation of wooden beams that had been carved by artisans using traditional techniques. Your mother, the manager said to Claire, worked here from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. On weekends, when the workers were off, she would come alone to clean, to catalog, to plan the next day's work. Sophie, who had been looking at the photographs with fascination, pointed to a picture where I was smiling, covered in dust but radiant with satisfaction. Grandma, you look so happy here. I was, my love, I whispered, stroking her hair. It was the most important project of my life. More important than us, Claire murmured, and for the first time, her voice held a note of reproach for herself instead of me. No, Claire. Just as important, but you never allowed me to be both at the same time. I had to choose between being your mother and being myself. And I chose to be your mother. David approached another photograph where I was cutting the ribbon at the hotel's official opening. I was wearing an elegant blue dress and a smile that radiated pride and satisfaction. Next to me were the then governor of South Carolina, the director of the National Trust, and several other dignitaries. You were at the opening with the governor? He asked, incredulous. I was at all the openings, David. At all the ceremonies. Alone. But, why alone? Why didn't you tell us how important it was? I did tell you. Claire told me she couldn't miss work to waste time at a party for old people. You told me you had an important presentation you couldn't cancel. Mark was at a golf tournament he'd already paid for and didn't want to waste. Jessica had a spa appointment she'd been waiting months for. Each word was like a stone dropping into a deep well. I could see in their faces how the memories were starting to return, how the excuses they had given so naturally at the time were now revealed for what they truly were, dismissals disguised as practical priorities. The manager spoke again, his tone having lost all pretense of professional neutrality. Ladies and gentlemen, let me explain something. Your mother didn't just save this building. Her work has been recognized nationally and internationally. Last year, UNESCO cited her project as a model for historical heritage preservation in North America. Jessica gasped. UNESCO. 2 years ago, the manager continued, the National Endowment for the Arts invited her to give a keynote address at the Kennedy Center on Sustainable Restoration Techniques. 6 months ago, she received the National Medal of Arts. The medal, Elena whispered. That day you came home late, you said you had been at a boring ceremony. And you didn't even ask what it was about, I replied softly. Claire, you were watching TV. You asked me if I could make dinner because you were hungry. Mark leaned against the wall as if his legs could no longer support him. My God, Eleanor. What have we done? You did what you thought was right, I answered, and I was surprised by the lack of resentment in my own voice. You decided that I was an old woman who was a bother, who interfered, who had nothing valuable left to contribute. And you acted accordingly. David turned to the manager. Mr. Reed, we want to apologize. We didn't know. Don't apologize to me, the manager interrupted him firmly. Apologize to your mother. Although frankly, after what I've witnessed tonight, I'm not sure you deserve her forgiveness. The tension in the air was palpable. My children looked at each other, searching for the right words, the magic formula that could undo decades of accumulated disregard. But there were no magic formulas. There were no words that could erase the humiliation they had just tried to inflict on me, the way they had tried to confine me to my room like a family shame to be hidden away. Sophie broke the silence with that innocent wisdom only children possess. Grandma, can you teach me how you saved this castle? It's not a castle, my love, I smiled, grateful for her bright presence in the midst of so much tension. It's a grand old house. And yes, I can teach you. Tomorrow, if you'd like. Tomorrow? Claire asked quickly. Mom, please, don't leave. We can fix this. For the first time all night, I looked her directly in the eyes. Fix what, exactly, Claire? The fact that you tried to have me kicked out of the hotel I saved? Or the fact that for years, you have treated me like a burden, like someone to be ashamed of? Both, she whispered, and finally the tears she had been holding back began to roll down her cheeks. Mom, both. Claire's tears didn't move me as I would have expected. For decades, I had been conditioned to respond immediately to any sign of pain in my children, to run and comfort them, to put their needs before mine without question. But tonight, something fundamental had changed within me. Her tears, while perhaps genuine, came too late and after too much damage. Claire, I said with a calmness that surprised me, tears don't erase 30 years. But Mom, David began, stepping closer. We can start over. Now that we know. Now that you know what, exactly? I interrupted, and for the first time in decades, my voice held an authority I'd forgotten I possessed. Now that you know I have value according to the world's standards? That I only deserve respect because my picture hangs on the walls of important hotels? David stepped back as if I had slapped him. No, that's not it. Yes, it is, David. That's exactly it. I turned to the manager, who had stood as a silent witness to this family revelation. Mr. Reed, could you please assure me that my room will remain available for the 3 nights I've paid for? Of course, Mrs. Vance. But I would like to offer you. No, I stopped him gently. The room I have is fine. I just need to know that it is mine, that no one can throw me out of it. The message was clear to everyone present. Mark ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from when he was young and had done something wrong. Eleanor, we never wanted to throw you out. Oh, no? An hour ago, you specifically asked the manager to place restrictions on me, to confine me to my room, to keep me away from you so I wouldn't interfere with your experience. Jessica tried to approach. We were confused, we didn't understand. No, I stopped her firmly. You weren't confused. You were ashamed. There's a difference. Sophie, who had been watching everything with the seriousness children sometimes adopt when they sense something important is happening, came and took my hand. Grandma, are you going to stay mad forever? Her question reached my heart in a way that all the adults' apologies had failed to do. I knelt to be at her level, ignoring the protest of my arthritic knees. I'm not mad, my love. I'm just tired. Very tired. Tired of us? Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. I rose slowly, looking at my children's faces as if seeing them for the first time. Claire, with her smudged makeup and an expression of genuine panic. David, with a defeated posture that contrasted dramatically with his usual confidence. Mark and Jessica, united in their shared discomfort. Tired of being invisible, I finally replied. Tired of explaining, of justifying, of begging for a place at my own family's table. The manager cleared his throat discreetly. If you'll allow me, I think it would be appropriate for me to leave the family to speak in private. No, I said quickly. Please, stay. You witnessed how they treated me when they thought I was just an annoying old woman. I would like you to witness what happens now that they know who I really am. Claire came closer, holding her hands out to me. Mom, please. I know we've made mistakes. Mistakes? The word came out harsher than I intended. Claire, asking the manager to lock me in my room wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate and cruel decision. You're right, David admitted, his voice breaking. You're absolutely right. We've been terrible children. Not terrible, I replied after a moment. Just blind. You chose to see only what was convenient for you to see. Mark approached the portrait on the wall, studying my image as if for the first time. Eleanor, all those times you talked about your projects, I thought you were trying to impress us with exaggerated stories. And why would you think that, Mark? When have I ever lied to you? When have I ever been dishonest with you? He couldn't answer because the answer was obvious, never. I had never been dishonest with them. They had simply decided that a woman my age couldn't achieve important things, that my stories must be fantasies from a mind clinging to imagined relevance. Mrs. Vance, the manager interjected gently, if I may, I'd like to mention one more thing. The hotel's board of directors has been discussing the creation of an educational program on heritage preservation. We had hoped to invite you to lead it. David's head shot up. An educational program? Your mother is considered one of the leading experts in historical restoration in the country, the manager explained. Universities all over the world request her for lectures. Universities? Jessica murmured, as if the word were from a foreign language. UNC, UCLA, Oxford, the Sorbonne, the manager listed. Last month, Harvard invited her to a symposium on cultural preservation. Claire put her hands to her head. Harvard invited you, and we told you that you were a bother. For the first time all night, I felt a pang of something that might have been pity for them. Not condescending pity, but a genuine sadness for all they had missed, for all the years of motherly pride they had squandered, for the opportunity to truly know the woman who had raised them. Yes, I said simply. That is exactly what you did. Sophie gently tugged on my dress. Grandma, can I go with you to talk at the universities? Her innocent question created a profound silence. It was the first time in years that anyone in my family had expressed genuine interest in joining me for something important to me. Of course, you can, my love, I replied, feeling my heart fill with a warmth that had been absent for so long. When you're a little older, you can come with me wherever you want. Would you invite me, too? Claire asked suddenly, her voice thick with desperate hope. I looked at her for a long moment. That's a very interesting question, Claire. Would you really want to come? Or are you only asking because now you know it's important? She couldn't answer immediately, and her silence was more honest than any rushed reply she could have given. Tomorrow, I announced, taking Sophie's hand, I am going to have breakfast in the main dining room. At the table by the windows. At 9 o'clock sharp. Anyone who wants to truly get to know Eleanor Vance, not just Mom or Grandma, is welcome to join me. I started toward the exit of the lounge but stopped beside the manager. Mr. Reed, thank you for showing them who I am. But more importantly, thank you for reminding me who I am. As I walked toward my room, I heard Claire call after me, Mom, wait. I turned one last time. Claire, for the first time in decades, I am not going to wait. Tomorrow, if you want to, you can come find me. But this time, you will come to me as who I am, not as who you decided I should be. That night, alone in my room with the high window, I didn't feel the claustrophobia I had the night before. Instead, I felt a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in decades, I had spoken my truth without apology, defended my dignity without fear of the consequences. I fell asleep holding my phone, looking at photos of all the projects, all the ceremonies, all the awards I had attended alone. But for the first time, that solitude didn't hurt. It was the solitude of someone who had chosen her own path, not the solitude of someone who had been abandoned on someone else's. I woke at 7 in the morning without an alarm, something that hadn't happened in years. My body, which had been tense for so long with the anxiety of not disappointing anyone, of not being a bother, of not being a burden, now felt strangely light. I got out of bed with an energy I had forgotten I possessed. For the first time since arriving at the hotel, I took my time getting ready. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I realized I had been dressing like the invisible woman they believed me to be. This morning, I chose my sky blue silk blouse, the one that had always made me feel elegant but that I rarely wore because Claire once commented it was too flashy for a woman my age. I did my hair carefully, applying a little blush and the coral lipstick I had brought but hadn't dared to use. As I looked at myself in the small bathroom mirror, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. I saw Eleanor Vance, not just Mom or Grandma, but the woman who had saved historic buildings, who had given international lectures, who had built something important with her own two hands. At 8:30, I went down to the dining room. The maitre d', an elegant man in his 40s, greeted me with a genuinely warm smile. Good morning, Mrs. Vance. I'm Antonio Morales, the maitre d'. It is an honor to have you with us. The honor is mine, Antonio, I replied, surprised at how easily the words flowed. For years, I had responded to compliments with automatic deflections, downplaying any recognition. But this morning, I simply accepted his courtesy. Would you like me to show you to your table? Yes, please. The table by the windows, where I sat yesterday. Of course. But may I suggest the main center table? It has the best view of the courtyard and is where we always seat our most distinguished guests. The main table. For 2 days I had eaten in corners, had been relegated to marginal spaces. Now I was being offered the place of honor. That sounds perfect, I accepted. As I walked through the dining room to the center table, I felt the gazes of other guests. But for the first time, I didn't shrink. I walked tall, with the dignity I had earned through decades of hard work and had allowed others to overshadow for too long. Antonio helped me with my chair and handed me a menu. May I bring you some coffee while you decide? Yes, please. A latte, if you would. It was 5 minutes to 9 when I saw Sophie run into the dining room, followed more cautiously by Claire. My granddaughter was wearing a yellow dress that made her shine like a little sun, and her face lit up when she saw me. "Grandma, you're sitting at the king's table." "Good morning, my love," I smiled, hugging her as she reached my side. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, and I dreamed that you lived in a castle and I was your princess helper," she told me with that charming seriousness only children possess. Claire approached more slowly, clearly nervous. She had dressed more carefully than on previous days, wearing a green dress that enhanced her eyes, and had styled her hair in a way that made her look younger, more like the girl she had been before becoming the woman who judged her mother. "Good morning, Mom," she said softly. May we join you?" "Of course," I replied, motioning to Antonio, who immediately came over to help Claire with her chair. We sat in silence for a few moments. Claire fidgeted with her napkin, while Sophie examined the elegant porcelain and silver cutlery with fascination. "Mom," Claire began finally, "I don't know where to start." "You could start by telling me something about yourself," I suggested. "Something real. Not about work or household problems or how tired you are. Something about who you are, Claire, not just what you do." The question seemed to startle her. She was quiet for a long moment, as if it were the first time anyone had ever asked her such a thing. I'm not sure I know the answer," she finally admitted. "That's okay," I said gently. "I wasn't sure either, until yesterday." Antonio returned to take our orders. Claire asked for avocado toast with a poached egg, Sophie wanted pancakes with syrup, and I chose the scrambled eggs with smoked salmon, a luxury I normally wouldn't have allowed myself, but which this morning felt like a small celebration of my newfound freedom. "Grandma," Sophie said as we waited for the food, "can you tell me how you saved this hotel?" "Well," I began, and I realized it was the first time in years that anyone in my family had asked me to tell this story without me having to beg for their attention. 30 years ago, this building was about to be demolished to build a shopping mall. "No!" Sophie exclaimed, horrified at the idea. "Yes, my love. But I was working for the State Historic Preservation Office back then, and when I saw the original blueprints of the building, I knew it was too important to be lost." Claire was looking at me with an attentiveness I hadn't experienced from her in decades. "So what did you do?" "First, I researched the building's history. It turned out it had been built in 1776 by a renowned architect in the Georgian style, and it had hosted important historical figures. Then I formed a consortium with other preservationists, secured grants from the National Trust, and I literally bought the building the day before the bulldozers were scheduled to arrive." "You bought the whole building?" Claire asked, incredulous. "With your grandmother's inheritance and my entire life savings," I confirmed. "Your father thought I had lost my mind." I remembered my late husband, Joseph, who had supported my passion for preservation even when it meant financial sacrifices. He understood that saving history was saving part of our culture's soul. "Dad never told us that," Claire murmured. "Because he was afraid he'd regret supporting me when he saw how much it cost. But when he saw the final result, when he saw how the project revitalized the entire neighborhood, he told me it had been the best investment of his life." The food arrived, and as we ate, I continued to tell the story I had never had the chance to fully share with my family. I told them about the artisans who had worked to restore the original frescoes, the archaeologists who had discovered treasures buried in the cellars, the nights I had spent sleeping in the building to protect it from vandals. "You slept here?" Sophie asked, fascinated. "For months. I had a sleeping bag in what is now the reception area. It was too risky to leave the building unprotected at night." Claire had stopped eating and was staring at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. "Mom, why did we never know these details?" "Because every time I started to tell them, someone would change the subject, or tell me I was being too dramatic, or that my stories were repetitive." Just then, David appeared at the entrance to the dining room. He stood there for a few minutes, clearly debating whether to approach or not. Finally, he walked toward our table with hesitant steps. Can I sit down?" he asked. "Of course," I replied, though I noticed my voice had lost some of the warmth it had held with Claire. David sat down and ordered coffee from Antonio. For several minutes, he ate in silence as I continued my story for Sophie, describing how they had restored the ceiling beams using 18th century techniques. "Mom," David said finally, "last night, Mark, Jessica, and I were up very late, talking." "Oh?" I responded with neutral politeness. "We realize that we don't know you at all. We know the woman who cooked for us, who took care of us when we were sick, who gave us money when we needed it. But we don't know Eleanor Vance." His words struck a deep chord, because they contained a truth that I myself had taken decades to recognize. For years, I had defined myself entirely in terms of my relationship to others, mother, wife, grandmother. I had forgotten that I was also a respected professional, a visionary, a woman with her own accomplishments. "That's true," I admitted. And part of the responsibility is mine. I allowed you to believe that was all I was. But we never asked, Claire said softly. We never asked you what you wanted, what made you happy beyond taking care of us. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine connection with my children, not based on what I could do for them, but on the mutual recognition of who we truly were as people. Well, I said, reaching out to take Sophie's hand, it's never too late to start really getting to know each other. 6 months later, I am sitting on the terrace of my new apartment in the historic district of Charleston, just 2 blocks from the hotel I saved 30 years ago. From here, I can see the steeple of St. Michael's Church lit by the evening sun, and the air carries the scent of the roses I planted in pots on the balcony. This morning, I received a call from the University of Virginia, inviting me to direct a master's program in historic preservation. The offer includes a salary that triples my old Social Security income, an office overlooking the university's historic lawn, and the opportunity to train the next generation of preservationists. I accepted immediately. The apartment where I live now is small but full of light, with high windows that frame views constantly reminding me why I dedicated my life to preserving America's architectural beauty. The walls are decorated not just with family photos, but with certificates of recognition, photographs of completed projects, and a small display case where I keep the National Medal of Arts I received last year. I no longer hide my achievements. I no longer downplay my work. I no longer allow anyone to make me feel that my passion for history is less important than their daily concerns. The move wasn't easy. For weeks after our return from Charleston, Claire called me daily, begging me to reconsider my decision to sell the family home and move out on my own. Mom, that house has so many memories, she would say, not understanding that was precisely why I needed to leave. They were not happy memories that filled those rooms. They were echoes of conversations where my voice had been silenced, of dinners where I had eaten alone while they discussed topics they considered too important to include me in, of nights where I had cried silently, wondering what I had done wrong to deserve so much indifference. David helped me with the move, carrying boxes with a solemnity that revealed how much he had changed since that night at the hotel. We found photo albums from ceremonies and openings where I appeared alone, smiling next to important people he didn't recognize. Mom, who is this man with you in this photo? He asked, pointing to an image where I stood beside the Director General of UNESCO. That's Thomas Weber, the head of the World Heritage Center at UNESCO, I explained. This photo is from the day my project was cited as an international model. David was quiet for a long time, holding the photograph, and we never even knew it existed. My relationship with my children has changed, but not in the way they expected. I am no longer the mother who is available at any hour for any need. I am no longer the family bank they can turn to when they have financial problems. I am no longer the automatic babysitter who watches the grandkids whenever they want to go out. I set clear boundaries. Visits are coordinated in advance, phone calls cannot interrupt my work schedule, and when they come to see me, it is not for me to serve them, but for us to share time as mutually respecting adults. Claire resisted at first. Mom, it feels like we're not a family anymore, she said during one of our first conversations after the move. We are still a family, Claire, I replied. But now we're a family where everyone has their own identity, not just you and David. The only exception to my new rules is Sophie. My granddaughter comes to visit me every Saturday morning, and together we explore Charleston's museums, visit historic homes, and she helps me in my little herb garden on the balcony. I am teaching her about Georgian architecture, about restoration techniques, about the importance of preserving history for future generations. Grandma, she said last Saturday as we examined the details of a 19th-century doorway, when I grow up, I want to save buildings like you. Her declaration filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in decades. Finally, someone in my family had inherited my passion, my vision, my understanding that preserving the past is building the future. Mark and Jessica have kept a respectful distance since that night. I occasionally receive text messages from Jessica, sharing articles about architecture or preservation she finds online, small attempts at connection that I appreciate but don't feel obligated to respond to immediately. The real change came 3 months ago, when Claire asked me to accompany her to a conference on women in architecture being held in Washington, D.C. Not because she needed me to watch Sophie or because she wanted me to pay for anything, but because she genuinely wanted to get to know that part of my world. During the conference, she saw me interact with colleagues who treated me as the authority I am, heard international speakers cite my work, and witnessed the standing ovation I received when I was introduced as one of the pioneers of heritage preservation in the United States. At the end of the day, as we had coffee in the lobby of the event hotel, Claire said something I never thought I would hear from her lips. Mom, I'm proud of you. Not of what I had done for her. Not of how I had raised her or how much money I had given her over the years. She was proud of me as a person, of my accomplishments, of the woman who had built a meaningful career in a male-dominated field. Last week, I received an unexpected letter. It was from a woman named Carol Jenkins from Savannah, who had read about my story in a New York Times article about older women who had been underestimated by their families. "Dear Mrs. Vance," she wrote, "your story gave me the courage to confront my own children about how they have treated me for years. Like you, I have been invisible in my own family, valued only for what I can do for others. Your example showed me that it's never too late to reclaim our dignity." I have received dozens of similar letters. Women from all over the country who identify with my experience, who have found in my story a reflection of their own lives of unrecognized sacrifice and unrequited love. This morning, as I watered my roses on the terrace, I reflected on the journey this transformation has been. It wasn't easy. There were lonely nights, moments of doubt where I wondered if I had been too harsh, if I had sacrificed the chance to repair family relationships for the pride of defending my dignity. But then I remember that night in the hotel, when my own children asked that I be confined to my room out of shame. I remember the humiliation of being treated as a problem to be solved, as a burden to be ashamed of. And I know I made the right decision. Now, when Claire calls, it's to ask about my work, to tell me about an article she read on preservation, to invite me to activities because she genuinely wants my company. When David visits, he brings flowers and asks about my current projects with real interest. They are small changes, but significant. They are the foundations of relationships based on mutual respect instead of family obligation. This afternoon, I am meeting with the team from UVA to discuss the curriculum for the new program. Tomorrow, I have an interview with the local news station about a restoration project in Savannah. This weekend, Sophie and I are going to visit the colonial ruins at Jamestown, where I'm going to teach her how archaeologists determine the age of ancient structures. My schedule is full, but no longer with obligations to others. It is filled with projects that excite me, with people who value my knowledge, with opportunities to continue building the legacy I started 30 years ago. As I write these lines, the sun sets over Charleston, painting the sky in oranges and pinks that rival the flowers on my balcony. Tomorrow will be another day full of possibilities, of projects to complete, of students to inspire. I am no longer the invisible woman hiding in the corners of her own life. I am Eleanor Vance, preservationist, visionary, protector of America's historical heritage. I am a woman who saved buildings, who shaped careers, who built a legacy that will last for centuries. And finally, after 72 years, I am free. Have you ever felt taken for granted by your family? Do you know someone who has lived through something similar? Share your experience in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe so that this message can reach someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, self-respect is the best inheritance we can leave for ourselves.